The happiest day of your life can become the moment that changes your destiny forever. Ryan Carter believed nothing could ruin the crisp Saturday afternoon when he stood beneath a canopy of white flowers at a beautiful country estate just outside Boston. Family members smiled, friends whispered excitedly, and soft piano music floated through the cool spring air as the ceremony was about to begin. After 2 years of planning every detail, he was finally ready to marry Lucas Bennett, the man he believed would stand beside him for the rest of his life. Ryan adjusted the sleeves of his elegant suit and took one slow breath, trying to calm the mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation racing through his heart. Then everything collapsed in a matter of seconds. Lucas stepped away before the officiant could speak another word. Instead of reaching for Ryan's hand, he turned toward the guests with an expression so cold that it seemed impossible to recognize the man Ryan thought he knew. "I'm sorry," Lucas announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent crowd. "I can't marry someone who has nothing left to offer my future." A wave of confused whispers spread through the audience. Ryan blinked, convinced he had misunderstood. Surely this had to be a terrible joke. But Lucas continued speaking, explaining that he had accepted an opportunity to join one of the city's wealthiest business families through another engagement, insisting it was the practical decision for his career. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. Some guests looked away in embarrassment, while others quietly exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ryan remained frozen where he stood, unable to process how the man who had promised forever could walk away without looking back even once. The music stopped. The photographer lowered his camera. Even the gentle breeze seemed to disappear as the silence became unbearable. Ryan wanted to leave, but his legs refused to move. Every carefully planned dream seemed to vanish before hundreds of watching eyes. Just as he believed the humiliation could not become any worse, the distant sound of luxury vehicles rolled up the long entrance road. Several sleek black SUVs came to a smooth stop outside the estate gates. Security professionals stepped aside respectfully as one tall man emerged with calm confidence. Wearing a perfectly tailored black suit beneath a refined overcoat, Alexander Knight crossed the courtyard with measured steps that immediately drew every eye toward him. Conversations ended before they even began. His reputation had traveled far beyond boardrooms and headlines. Some knew him as one of the country's most influential business leaders. Others quietly referred to him as the Alpha Mafia boss whose decisions shaped entire industries. Alexander stopped only a few feet from Ryan. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Ryan searched his face, certain they had never met before. Instead of addressing the shocked guests or acknowledging Lucas, Alexander looked directly into Ryan's eyes with quiet certainty. Then, in a steady voice that carried across the silent venue, he spoke words no one present would ever forget. "You're mine now." Gasps echoed throughout the courtyard. Lucas stared in disbelief. Cameras instantly turned toward the unexpected scene. Ryan could barely breathe as confusion overwhelmed every emotion inside him. Before anyone could question what those words truly meant, Alexander calmly extended his hand, offering Ryan a choice that would transform both of their lives forever. Ryan stared at Alexander's outstretched hand as countless thoughts collided inside his mind. Only minutes earlier, he had believed his future had ended in front of everyone he cared about. Now a complete stranger, one of the most influential men in the country, was offering him a way out without revealing a single explanation. The silence lasted only a few seconds before Lucas finally laughed with open disbelief. "You cannot be serious," Lucas said, folding his arms confidently. "You do not even know him." Alexander slowly turned his attention toward Lucas, his expression remaining calm and unreadable. "I know enough," he answered quietly. Those 3 words immediately erased the confidence from Lucas's face. Around them, guests whispered as reporters and photographers who had been invited to cover the wedding cautiously moved closer, sensing an unexpected story unfolding before their eyes. Ryan could feel every camera pointed toward him again. The attention that had humiliated him moments earlier now felt strangely different. Yet he still had no idea why Alexander had appeared. "Why are you doing this?" Ryan finally asked, barely above a whisper. Alexander looked directly at him. "Because no one deserves to be abandoned as if their life has no value." Ryan searched his eyes for signs of pity or hidden motives, but found neither. There was only quiet certainty. Before Ryan could ask another question, Alexander continued, "You do not have to decide your future today. I am simply offering you a safe place to leave with your dignity intact." Those words reached Ryan more deeply than he expected. Throughout the painful afternoon, no one else had asked how he felt. Most had watched in silence while his world collapsed. Alexander was the first person to treat him as someone worthy of respect instead of sympathy. Ryan slowly accepted the offered hand. A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the crowd as Alexander gently guided him away from the ceremony. Neither man looked back. Security personnel respectfully opened the door of a waiting luxury vehicle, shielding Ryan from the growing crowd of questions and flashing cameras. As the vehicle quietly pulled away from the estate, Ryan watched the familiar road disappear through the window. He realized he had left behind not only a canceled wedding, but an entire chapter of his life. For several miles, neither man spoke. The peaceful countryside gradually gave way to the Boston skyline, while soft afternoon sunlight reflected across the Charles River. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "I still do not understand why you came." Alexander rested one hand on a small leather portfolio lying beside him. "Because your name appeared in an investigation that began months ago." Ryan frowned. "An investigation?" Alexander nodded once. "Your former fiancé made choices that reached far beyond your relationship. Those choices placed innocent people at risk, including you." Ryan felt his heartbeat quicken again. Lucas had spoken endlessly about business opportunities over the past year, but Ryan had never imagined those conversations could hide something more serious. "If that is true," Ryan said carefully, "why did nobody warn me?" Alexander looked out the window before answering. "We were gathering facts, not assumptions. I refuse to accuse anyone without evidence." The vehicle turned through elegant wrought iron gates into a quiet private estate surrounded by towering oak trees and carefully maintained gardens. Instead of the intimidating fortress Ryan had imagined, the property felt peaceful and welcoming. As the car stopped near the entrance, Alexander faced him once more. "You are my guest," he said. "Nothing more will be asked of you until you are ready. For now, all I want is for you to know that your story did not end this afternoon. In many ways, it has only just begun." Ryan woke just after sunrise, uncertain for a brief moment where he was. The guest suite overlooking the quiet gardens felt peaceful, almost unreal after the emotional storm of the previous afternoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating polished hardwood floors and shelves filled with books instead of the extravagant displays he had expected from someone with Alexander Knight's reputation. Everything about the estate suggested discipline rather than excess. After getting dressed in the fresh clothes that had been thoughtfully prepared for him, Ryan stepped into the hallway where a member of the household staff greeted him warmly and invited him to breakfast. The dining room overlooked a peaceful lake, and Alexander was already seated with a cup of coffee and a stack of neatly organized documents. He stood as Ryan entered, an unexpected gesture of courtesy that immediately eased some of Ryan's lingering anxiety. "I hope you were able to rest," Alexander said. Ryan nodded. "Better than I expected." A quiet breakfast followed, free from uncomfortable questions. Instead of discussing the previous day's shocking events, Alexander asked about Ryan's career, his interests, and the small bakery where he had worked before becoming engaged. Ryan slowly realized that Alexander was genuinely listening, instead of searching for information he could use. After breakfast, Alexander invited Ryan into a private study lined with legal books, business reports, and framed photographs of community projects his company had supported over the years. He opened the leather portfolio Ryan had noticed during the drive and carefully spread several documents across the desk. "I promised I would only speak with evidence," Alexander said. "Now I can finally show you why I came." Ryan leaned forward as Alexander revealed copies of financial records, business agreements, and email summaries collected through a lawful corporate investigation. None of them mentioned romance. Instead, they revealed that Lucas had secretly negotiated with executives connected to a powerful investment group, promising access to confidential information through his relationship with Ryan. One document included references to Ryan's family trust and personal financial history, information Ryan had never authorized anyone to share. His hands trembled as he looked from one page to another. "He used my name," Ryan whispered. Alexander nodded quietly. He believed your reputation and future inheritance would strengthen his position during those negotiations. Ryan struggled to understand how the man he had trusted for years could have treated him as nothing more than a convenient opportunity. Why did he suddenly end everything yesterday, he asked. Alexander slid one final document across the desk. It contained the announcement of a merger between two influential business families that had become public only hours before the canceled wedding. Lucas had accepted an engagement with the daughter of one of those families shortly before making his public announcement. Ryan slowly closed the folder, feeling disappointment instead of anger. So, I was never the destination, he said softly. I was simply part of the journey he planned for himself. Alexander remained silent for a respectful moment before speaking. You deserved honesty from the beginning. Ryan looked toward the window where spring sunlight reflected across the calm water outside. For the first time since his world had fallen apart, he realized the painful truth was beginning to replace uncertainty. It hurt, but it also brought clarity. As he turned back toward Alexander, another question surfaced. If this investigation is already this complete, Ryan asked, why do I feel like you are still expecting something worse to happen? Alexander closed the portfolio with measured care and met Ryan's eyes. Because the people who benefited from Lucas's decisions have not finished protecting their own interests, and now they know you are no longer standing alone. Ryan remained silent long after Alexander's final words settled into the room. The peaceful estate suddenly felt much smaller than it had only moments before. He had spent years believing his greatest challenge was recovering from heartbreak. Yet now he understood that the decisions made behind closed boardroom doors had quietly reshaped his life without his knowledge. Alexander carefully gathered the documents and locked them inside the leather portfolio before standing. Come with me, he said calmly. Curious, Ryan followed him through a series of bright hallways until they reached a spacious operations room overlooking the estate gardens. Several large monitors displayed news channels, financial reports, weather forecasts, and security cameras covering the entrances to the property. The atmosphere was professional rather than intimidating. Team members greeted Alexander respectfully before returning to their work. No one appeared frightened or rushed. Everything operated with quiet precision. Alexander introduced Ryan to Evelyn Brooks, the director of corporate security, who welcomed him with a warm smile and assured him that everyone there was focused on protecting people through legal investigations and careful planning. Ryan immediately realized that many of the assumptions he had formed from rumors about Alexander's organization did not match reality. As they spoke, one of the analysts quietly approached Alexander with a tablet. Alexander reviewed the information without changing his expression, then handed the screen to Ryan. A series of online articles and social media posts had suddenly appeared, all repeating the same misleading story. According to the headlines, Ryan had willingly abandoned the wedding after secretly arranging a relationship with Alexander for personal gain. Ryan stared at the screen in disbelief. None of this is true, he said. Evelyn nodded sympathetically. False stories spread quickly when someone hopes to control the public conversation. Ryan felt the familiar weight of anxiety returning. People are going to believe this. Alexander answered with complete confidence. Some will. Others will wait for facts. Our responsibility is not to chase every rumor. Our responsibility is to uncover the truth. Before Ryan could respond, another notification appeared. A respected investigative journalist had contacted Alexander's office requesting an interview after receiving anonymous documents accusing Ryan of financial misconduct. The accusations were entirely fabricated, but they had clearly been prepared in advance. Ryan slowly understood what Alexander had meant. The canceled wedding had not been the final move. It had only been the beginning of a carefully planned attempt to destroy his credibility. Alexander turned toward his team. Verify every source before responding, he instructed. No speculation, only evidence. Everyone acknowledged the order immediately. Ryan watched the quiet professionalism surrounding him and found himself breathing more steadily. For the first time since the wedding, he no longer felt completely alone. Later that afternoon, Alexander invited Ryan to walk through the gardens surrounding the estate. Spring flowers lined the stone pathways while a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming trees across the peaceful grounds. I am sorry your life became connected to this, Alexander said honestly. Ryan looked toward the distant lake before answering. Yesterday, I thought losing my wedding was the worst thing that could happen. Today I realize I was being protected from something much worse without even knowing it. Alexander gave a small nod. And now we make sure the truth reaches the people who deserve to hear it. As they continued walking, Ryan noticed a dark vehicle slowing briefly outside the estate entrance before driving away again without stopping. The security staff observed it quietly and recorded the license plate without creating alarm. Ryan glanced toward Alexander, who remained composed, but the thoughtful look in his eyes confirmed one important truth. The people hiding behind the lies had realized Ryan was no longer standing by himself, and they were already searching for another way to regain control of the story. The following morning began with an unexpected sense of purpose. Instead of feeling like a guest hiding from the outside world, Ryan found himself joining Alexander in the estate library, where sunlight poured across a long oak table covered with organized folders, digital tablets, and neatly labeled financial records. Evelyn entered carrying another collection of verified documents and explained that several companies connected to Lucas had quietly changed ownership during the months leading up to the canceled wedding. Ryan listened carefully, but this time he did not simply observe. As he reviewed familiar company names, he noticed one small detail that everyone else had overlooked. One consulting firm listed in the records had sponsored a charity event where Lucas had insisted Ryan attend nearly a year earlier. Ryan remembered signing a simple guest registration form before entering the venue. "Wait," Ryan said, pointing toward the company name. This organization collected personal information from every guest that evening. Evelyn immediately compared the event records with the investigation timeline. Within minutes, the analysts discovered that the same organization had appeared repeatedly throughout several transactions connected to the growing network under review. Alexander looked at Ryan with quiet approval. "Your memory just connected pieces that our documents alone could not." Ryan smiled for the first time in days. He no longer felt like someone waiting to be rescued. He had become part of finding the truth. Throughout the afternoon, Alexander and Ryan worked side by side, reviewing calendars, public announcements, and archive correspondence. Whenever Ryan grew discouraged by another disappointing discovery, Alexander patiently reminded him to focus on facts instead of assumptions. The steady rhythm of cooperation slowly replaced the uncertainty that had defined their first meeting. During a short coffee break in the garden, Ryan admitted something that had been weighing on his mind. "I spent so much time blaming myself for what happened," he said quietly. "Now I realize I ignored warning signs because I wanted everything to work." Alexander set his coffee cup on the stone table before answering. "Trust is not a weakness. The people who chose dishonesty are responsible for their own decisions." Those words remained with Ryan long after they returned inside. Late that afternoon, the investigation reached another important breakthrough. By combining Ryan's recollection with verified business records, the team identified a pattern showing that confidential personal information had been gathered through seemingly harmless public events before being used to influence private negotiations. Every conclusion was supported by documented evidence, strengthening the credibility of the investigation. Evelyn prepared a secure report for legal counsel while Alexander reviewed every page with careful attention. No one rushed the process. Accuracy mattered more than speed. As evening approached, Ryan looked across the study where only a few days earlier he had arrived carrying nothing except disappointment and unanswered questions. Now the room represented something entirely different. It had become the place where he was rebuilding his confidence, one fact at a time. Alexander closed the final folder and looked toward Ryan. "You have helped more today than you realize," he said sincerely. Ryan nodded with quiet determination. "Then I want to keep helping until the entire truth is known." Alexander extended a respectful handshake instead of making promises. Ryan accepted it without hesitation. At that moment, their relationship no longer rested on sympathy or obligation. It was built on mutual trust, shared purpose, and the belief that honesty would ultimately overcome deception. Neither of them noticed that, across the city, preparations were already underway for a prestigious charity gala where many of the same influential people connected to the investigation would soon gather, creating the perfect stage for the next and most dangerous test of everything they had uncovered. 2 days later, the city buzzed with anticipation as business leaders, nonprofit organizations, and members of the press gathered inside one of Boston's most respected historic hotels for an annual charity gala. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom, while a string quartet welcomed arriving guests. Ryan adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy suit and took a slow breath before stepping through the entrance beside Alexander. Only a few days earlier, he would have avoided every camera in the room. Now he walked forward with quiet confidence, knowing he had done nothing wrong. Alexander noticed the brief hesitation in Ryan's expression. "Remember," he said calmly, "we are here because the truth belongs in the light, not because we owe anyone an explanation." Ryan nodded and entered with renewed determination. Conversations briefly paused as many guests recognized the two of them arriving together. Some faces reflected curiosity, while others quickly looked away, uncertain how to react after days of conflicting headlines and online speculation. Throughout the reception, Alexander greeted business partners with his usual professionalism while Ryan remained close, carefully observing the people around them. It did not take long before familiar faces appeared across the ballroom. Lucas entered alongside several executives connected to the same investment group identified during the investigation. Although Lucas maintained a confident smile, Ryan noticed the surprise that flashed across his face the moment their eyes met. He had clearly expected Ryan to disappear from public view instead of attending one of the city's most visible events. Shortly afterward, large presentation screens positioned around the ballroom unexpectedly displayed a series of anonymous digital slides accusing Alexander's company of manipulating charitable donations while suggesting Ryan had participated in financial misconduct. A wave of whispers spread through the audience as reporters immediately reached for their cameras. Ryan felt the room tense, but instead of panicking, he remembered everything Alexander had taught him over the previous days. Facts first. Assumptions never. Alexander remained remarkably composed. He quietly requested permission from the event organizers to address the guests before speculation could spread further. The organizers agreed. Standing at the front of the ballroom, Alexander thanked everyone for their patience before explaining that the presentation had appeared without authorization. He then invited Evelyn, accompanied by independent legal counsel and an outside forensic accounting specialist, to present verified documentation prepared long before the event. One by one, every accusation displayed on the screens was matched against certified financial records, publicly available filings, and independently verified audit reports. The audience watched as each misleading claim unraveled under careful examination. Ryan then stepped forward and calmly described the charity event he had attended the previous year, explaining how seemingly routine registration forms had later become part of a broader pattern uncovered through documented evidence. His voice remained steady, supported by dates, records, and facts rather than emotion. Several journalists immediately began comparing the newly presented information with the anonymous allegations circulating online. Within minutes, the tone inside the ballroom shifted completely. Questions that had initially focused on Ryan and Alexander were now directed toward the origin of the false claims and the organizations connected to them. Across the room, Lucas's confident expression slowly disappeared as reporters approached members of his business group seeking clarification. No raised voices filled the ballroom. No dramatic confrontation unfolded. Instead, the truth quietly changed the direction of every conversation. As the evening drew to a close, Ryan looked at Alexander with genuine gratitude. "A week ago I thought my future had ended," he said softly. Alexander smiled. Sometimes losing the wrong path is the only way to discover the right one. Neither of them realized that the investigation had now attracted the attention of federal regulatory authorities, who had quietly requested a private meeting for the following morning after reviewing the evidence presented that evening, signaling that the search for the complete truth had entered an entirely new chapter. The following morning, the atmosphere inside Alexander's headquarters was noticeably quieter than usual. News from the charity gala had spread across every major business publication, and independent journalists were already publishing corrections that challenged the false accusations made only hours earlier. Ryan sat across from Alexander in the executive conference room as Evelyn entered carrying a sealed folder marked confidential. "The federal regulatory team has reviewed the preliminary evidence," she explained. "They have requested full cooperation and additional documentation." Alexander accepted the folder without hesitation. Ryan noticed that several pages outlined possible consequences for Alexander's own companies if every financial record was opened for review. Your businesses could face months of audits, Ryan said with concern. Even if you have done nothing wrong, this could damage your reputation. Alexander calmly nodded. Perhaps, but if transparency is the price of proving the truth, then it is a price worth paying. Ryan looked at him in surprise. You would risk everything you have built? Alexander answered without the slightest hesitation. I would rather lose contracts than allow an innocent person to carry blame that does not belong to him. Those words settled deeply in Ryan's heart. Throughout his relationship with Lucas, every important decision had revolved around convenience, status, or personal gain. Sitting across from Alexander, he was witnessing something entirely different. Integrity was not simply a promise. It was a choice demonstrated through action. Later that afternoon, teams of independent auditors arrived at Alexander's headquarters. Offices remained open, records were voluntarily provided, and every request was answered with complete cooperation. Employees continued their work professionally, understanding that honesty required nothing to hide. Ryan watched the process unfold with growing admiration. Nobody complained about the inconvenience because everyone understood the larger purpose. While reviewing archived correspondence with Evelyn, Ryan discovered another overlooked detail. Several messages exchanged between Lucas and the investment group had been sent only hours before the canceled wedding, confirming that the public humiliation had been carefully timed to maximize media attention. Ryan quietly closed the file, no longer feeling anger. Instead, he felt relief that the deception had ended before becoming a lifetime commitment. That evening, Ryan joined Alexander on the terrace overlooking the gardens as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh spring flowers through the peaceful estate. I have been thinking about something, Ryan said softly. When you stood in front of everyone that day, why did you say those exact words? Alexander smiled gently before answering. Most people assumed they meant possession. They did not. Ryan listened carefully. Then what did they mean? Alexander looked toward the fading horizon before speaking. I wanted every person in that courtyard to understand one simple truth. From that moment forward, you would not face humiliation alone. You had someone willing to stand beside you until the truth was known. Ryan felt emotion rise unexpectedly, not because of dramatic declarations, but because those words perfectly matched everything Alexander had done since the wedding. Every promise had been supported by patience, respect, and unwavering honesty. Before either man could continue, Evelyn stepped onto the terrace carrying her phone. The regulators have completed their initial review, she announced with a relieved smile. They found no evidence of wrongdoing within Alexander's companies. Instead, they have formally expanded the investigation into the investment network connected to Lucas. Ryan slowly exhaled, realizing that the sacrifices Alexander had willingly accepted had not only protected the investigation, but had also revealed the strength of his character. As evening settled over the estate, both men understood that the hardest part of the journey was finally approaching, because the complete truth would soon be presented where the entire city could no longer ignore it. 3 days later, every major news network in Boston carried the same announcement. Federal regulators, independent auditors, and corporate investigators would jointly present the verified findings of the investigation during a public press conference designed to address weeks of speculation. Reporters, business leaders, and community representatives filled the conference hall long before the scheduled start. Ryan stood quietly beside Alexander in a private waiting room, watching live coverage on a television screen. Only a week earlier, he had been remembered as the Omega abandoned at his own wedding. Today, he was preparing to speak not as a victim, but as someone determined to tell the truth with honesty and dignity. Alexander noticed Ryan taking a slow breath and offered a reassuring smile. You do not need to convince everyone, he said calmly. You only need to tell the truth. The evidence will do the rest. Moments later, they entered the conference hall together. Cameras flashed, but the atmosphere felt entirely different from the painful afternoon when Ryan had stood alone before a crowd filled with whispers. This time, independent investigators opened the presentation first. They carefully explained how months of verified financial records, electronic correspondence, public filings, and witness statements had established a clear timeline. Every conclusion was supported by documented evidence that had been independently reviewed. Charts displayed on large screens demonstrated how confidential personal information collected through seemingly harmless business events had later been connected to private negotiations involving Lucas and several executives from the investment group. The investigators also confirmed that fabricated online accusations against Ryan and Alexander had originated from accounts associated with the same network responsible for spreading misleading information after the canceled wedding. As each verified finding appeared on the screens, the room grew quieter. Questions from journalists shifted away from speculation and focused entirely on the documented facts. When Ryan was invited to speak, he stepped to the podium without hesitation. Looking across the audience, he recognized familiar faces from the wedding, members of the media, and people who had once believed the false stories circulating online. "I spent many days asking myself what I had done wrong," Ryan said with steady confidence. "Today I understand that honesty does not always prevent disappointment, but it always provides the strongest foundation for moving forward. I am grateful to everyone who chose to wait for evidence before reaching conclusions." His words were met with respectful silence, followed by warm applause from many in attendance. Alexander then briefly thanked the investigators, legal professionals, and journalists who had committed themselves to careful reporting instead of rumor. He declined to criticize anyone personally, explaining that accountability belonged in the legal process rather than public anger. The professionalism of his response earned quiet respect throughout the room. By the conclusion of the conference, regulatory officials announced that the investigation into the investment network would continue through the appropriate legal channels, while confirming that Ryan had been completely cleared of every accusation made against him. Alexander's companies had likewise been found fully cooperative throughout the review. As reporters filed their final stories, many acknowledged how dramatically the facts had differed from the original rumors. Outside the conference center, Ryan and Alexander paused on the broad stone steps overlooking the city. The afternoon sunlight reflected from the surrounding buildings as people walked past carrying on with their ordinary lives. Ryan smiled gently before turning toward Alexander. "Thank you for believing in me before I knew how to believe in myself again." Alexander returned the smile with quiet warmth. Sometimes the greatest victory is not proving someone else wrong. It is helping the right person discover that their future was never defined by the worst day of their life. As they walked away together, neither of them realized that the journey, which had begun with heartbreak, had already inspired a future far brighter than either had imagined, and that future was waiting only a few months ahead. 4 months passed, and the difficult chapter that had once dominated every headline gradually became a distant memory. Summer had arrived in Boston, bringing bright mornings, clear skies, and a renewed sense of possibility. Ryan Carter had returned to doing what he loved most, but this time with a dream entirely his own. With encouragement from Alexander, he had opened a small artisan bakery in a quiet neighborhood overlooking the Charles River. The welcoming storefront quickly became known for fresh pastries, locally roasted coffee, and the kindness that Ryan offered every customer who walked through the door. People no longer recognized him as the Omega whose wedding had ended in heartbreak. They knew him as someone who had rebuilt his life with honesty, determination, and quiet strength. Alexander continued leading his companies with the same calm integrity that had earned respect throughout the investigation. Transparency initiatives introduced after the case had become a model for several major organizations, and community partnerships flourished under his leadership. Although both men remained busy with their own responsibilities, they made time to share breakfast every Sunday morning before the bakery opened. Those peaceful conversations, free from cameras and public attention, gradually became the most meaningful part of each week. One warm Saturday evening, the city hosted a charity celebration in the historic public garden to recognize individuals and organizations whose commitment to integrity had positively influenced the community. Ryan attended as the owner of a successful local business supporting neighborhood food programs, while Alexander was invited to receive recognition for corporate leadership and ethical reform. As the ceremony concluded, families gathered across the park while musicians performed beneath strings of glowing lights. Ryan and Alexander quietly stepped away from the crowd and walked along a peaceful path lined with blooming roses. The same calm confidence that had first drawn Ryan's attention remained visible in Alexander's gentle smile. After a few moments of comfortable silence, Alexander stopped beside a small stone bridge overlooking the water. "There is something I have wanted to ask ever since the day we met," he said. Ryan looked at him with quiet curiosity. Alexander reached into his jacket and revealed a simple ring crafted from white gold, elegant without unnecessary extravagance. "The first time I extended my hand to you, I wanted you to know that you would never face life alone again," he said softly. "Today I am asking something different. Will you choose to walk beside me because that is what your own heart wants?" Ryan felt tears of happiness gathering in his eyes as memories of the past few months gently passed through his mind. The abandoned wedding, the painful uncertainty, the search for truth, and the countless moments of patience and respect had all led to this quiet evening filled with hope instead of fear. With a smile brighter than the city lights reflecting across the water, Ryan answered, "Yes, I choose you, not because you rescued me, but because you always believed I could become the person I was meant to be." Alexander carefully placed the ring on Ryan's hand as applause unexpectedly rose behind them. Their friends, colleagues, Evelyn, members of the bakery staff, and many people whose lives had been touched by their journey had quietly gathered nearby, smiling warmly as they celebrated the beginning of a new chapter. Ryan looked around before returning his gaze to Alexander and gently squeezed his hand. Together they walked toward the waiting crowd beneath the summer sky, no longer defined by betrayal or misunderstanding, but by trust earned through honesty, kindness strengthened through adversity, and a future they had chosen to build together one hopeful day at a time.